Welcome to UWT Ultimate Wrestling Trivia, the show. The man down there in the yellow, Mike Merc. The man in the middle, Dashing Derek. My name is Devon. Appreciate you guys hitting that subscribe button, telling a friend each and every Tuesday, 6:05 Eastern Time. And you can check out ProWrestlingTees.com. Search Ultimate Wrestling Trivia. We are on Pro Wrestling Tees. Shout out to the good people out there. Get yourself some merch, some swag. Support Ultimate Wrestling Trivia, the show. Today, we're talking about WCW, what it meant to you. Established in 1988 after breaking away from the NWA. The owners, Jim Crockett from 73 to 88. Then you know that Mr. Ted Turner took over probably when it was at its biggest from 88 to 2001. You had young stars like Sting and Luger, Pillman, and you had all the stars for when Ted Turner took over from Flair and Steamboat, who had incredible matches. Terry Funk was in there as well. And then, of course, the World Wrestling Entertainment took over from 2001 till present, where it may be right now. WCW, what did it mean to you? What did you think back in the day?
Well, I remember watching some of the Clash of the Champions, but for me, a big reason why I got into WCW is, well, you had all the WWF figures.
I did. I was very loyal to WWF, WWE back in the day. Well, it really wasn't much of a WCW guy for me.
Well, I wanted something different, so I wanted all the WCW Galoob action figures.
Sure.
So I collected all those.
Some great figures, too. Brian Pillman, yes. Doom, Arn Anderson.
Sting, Lex Luger, so... we don't realize like how much video games and action figures create fans now these days.
True.
So it kind of made me a fan of WCW. And then when they got Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage from WWF, I was like, this kind of legitimized them in my eyes. So I started paying attention a little bit more. And then, of course, the NWO comes along.
They created NWO, and that took over the world.
Yeah, and then the cruiserweight matches, I think, that opened up WCW Nitro really got me hooked. So, and then, of course, them bringing in the New Japan guys, it was kind of like the original Forbidden Door that they had. They had, the luchadors, they had the Japan guys, they had the WWF superstars coming over. So that's what made me a fan of WCW.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, similar. I didn't have cable as a kid. So as a kid, I wasn't exposed to the NWA, but I did subscribe to Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler. I bought Pro Wrestling Illustrated on a regular basis, and they gave equal coverage to WWF and NWA and then AWA. And my sister, who did have cable, my older sister, when I would visit her sometimes after like sporting events or practice, I could catch at 6:05 Live, the WCW World Championship Wrestling, which was the name of the show that the NWA put on before it branched off and became its own promotion. Like Derek said, I felt WCW really got legitimized when they scooped up the names from WWF, but their homegrown stars were the ones that I fell in love with. Like I dug Sting. I had seen some Sting in UWF with Hot Stuff Inc. and Eddie Gilbert, so I followed him. The Four Horsemen were cool AF. Like they were a lot of fun. And Nitro was around the time I got to watch them regularly. So when Nitro launched around that time, my parents had gotten a satellite dish, so I was able to get cable through the satellite to watch Nitro on a regular basis. And you saw Diesel and Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash show up. That springboarded into the NWO, and it took off out of the stratosphere.
So a lot of people will say that WWF was the cartoon era, and they wanted real wrestling, so a lot of people transitioned into that NWA turning into WCW. I just could not jump the ship. But going back, thanks to the network, and obviously years later, I did watch it, and I was like, wow, I sure did miss out on a lot of great stuff WCW brought to the table.
It does remind you a lot of AEW, like
True.
WCW being shot by Turner Sports on TBS and TNT. You have a similar kind of camera style, the logos a little bit like the way you see a lot of independent wrestling stars show up in AEW, WCW was like that as well. So WWF at the time had like 30 wrestlers under contract that were their main 30 guys. WCW had like 120 wrestlers under contract. So like I remember reading about Rochester Roadblock in a magazine.
Great name.
And then you'd see them on WCW TV, and maybe it was getting squashed or sometimes they went over. Like there were a lot of matches that weren't necessarily tied to angles, but all of a sudden Mike Enos and Dirty Dick Slater are a tag team, and wrestlers from a era gone by. You know, gentleman Chris Adams, who was a star in world class, was just kind of there in WCW, but it was cool to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to toss it to our favorite heel, Angelo Stefano. He's here to talk about the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez. Let's throw it to him in the back right now.
Welcome back to my segment. I'm Angelo Stefano, and this is called What Could Have Been, where I pick a wrestler from back in the day of my favorite era of professional wrestling, which was the 1980s NWA. Today's subject is none other than the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez. I wasn't the biggest fan of Manny Fernandez, but I always appreciated seeing him on my TV. He was involved in some great angles. He was originally a first-time NWA Tag Team Champion with Dusty Rhodes, and then later on he would capture that title with Ravishing Rick Rude. After he captured that, of course, after he had been a babyface teaming with Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant, and he took Paul Jones' dirty money and did a number on the Boogie Woogie Man. He left the promotion slightly after Rick Rude did in 1987. And I'm going to wonder what could have happened had he stuck around the NWA. Well, I think he was a really great tag team wrestler. I don't think he ever would have gotten a real big push as a singles. I could see him vying for perhaps the television title, maybe getting a couple U.S. title shots, but I think that was probably his ceiling. And maybe he knew it too, because he left the NWA, like I said, in 1987, going down to the AWA, where he had a pretty good little feud with Wahoo McDaniel, resulting, I believe, the final match was an Indian strap match. I believe he is still with us today, which is a good thing. Last I heard, around 2021, he had a podcast. Not quite sure if that's still around. But don't you forget Manny Fernandez. I know I won't, because that was my favorite era of professional wrestling, the 1980s NWA. Thanks for watching.
All right, appreciate you very much, Angelo Stefano. Gotta love that right there. Speaking of WCW, back in 2001, do you know any of the final champions off the top of your head? Who the final heavyweight champion was?
Scott Steiner?
Was not Scott Steiner.
Booker T.
Booker
is the
T.
final champion.
Ding him up if I had a bell.
Yeah.
Booker T, the final heavyweight champion and the final U.S. champion as well. Chuck Palumbo, Sean O'Hare, the WCW Tag Team Champions. The Cruiserweight champion, want to take a stab at that? Who was the final one?
Not Billy Kidman.
This guy is a producer.
Hurricane.
Yeah, Shane Helms. The TV champion, Jim Duggan. The final Cruiserweight Tag Team Championship, which kind of some people may forgot that was a thing. Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman were the Tag Team Champions. And the WCW Hardcore Champion was...
Hardcore Hack or Sandman.
Hardcore Hack.
No?
No, incorrect.
I was going to say...
Old
Vito?
WWF wrestler.
Vito?
Al Snow.
No.
No.
Got some kids in wrestling right now, currently. Not ringing a bell. You drop it in the comments if you know right now. Ming. Ming was the final.
Wow.
Of course, the WCW was bought out by WWE, and the final champions for that. Do you know who the final WCW/WWE heavyweight champion was, by chance?
Was it 5-time Booker T?
It is not.
Oh,
Steve Austin?
No, this guy is currently still wrestling in AEW.
I'm just going to say Jericho. Though.
Chris Jericho.
Oh, yeah.
Edge was the final U.S. heavyweight champion. The Dudley Boys, the final WCW Tag Team Champions. Cruiserweight champion, was the final one?
Rey Mysterio.
Nope.
Chavo?
Nope. A friend of the show from overseas spits out stuff in his mouth. ECW guy.
Tajiri.
Tajiri. Tajiri was your final WCW Cruiserweight Champion. And speaking of the Shockmaster, WCW's very own is joining the show today with some Ultimate Wrestling trivia. Let us know if you know the answer to this one.
When the Shockmaster made his debut in the War Games match, which one of the following wrestlers was not my tag team partner?
If you know the answer to that Shockmaster trivia, drop it in the comments. Let us know. All right, fire up the old peacock. We are doing another watch along WCW. We're taking you to Halloween Havoc, 1998. DDP versus Bill Goldberg at the 258 mark. 3, 2, and 1.
I have zero memory of
This is
matchup.
Yeah, this is going to be a new one. We're starting off with Michael Buffer, not to be confused with Bruce Buffer in the ring. Michael Buffer doing the introductions, which was part of the show too back in the day. WCW really utilized Buffer.
And it was always super cool to see him. It really brought like the big fight feel. He probably cost a pretty penny, which is probably part of the reason why WCW doesn't exist today. But yeah, very cool to see Michael Buffer.
And as we said, Halloween Havoc 1998. This is coming from the MGM Grand Studios in Sin City, the capital entertainment of the world. Which, shout out to Halloween Havoc too. I always love being a Halloween guy. The big pumpkin in the middle. They had the big bat. The Gargamel over the top. They had the two, it looks like the graves over there. I mean, the entrance is phenomenal.
Something WCW did that was a big part of their brand strategy. WWF had the same stage for Raw, their own unique SmackDown stage. WCW would have the different stages for the different pay-per-view events. And that was pretty cool. Bash at the Beach would have sand.
The sand and the umbrellas and the folding chairs and stuff. You're right. Yep. It just added more element to the TV, to the eye, where you could relate to it as DDP makes his way through the crowd here. Halloween Havoc 98. Hogan Warrior, the rematch from Mania 6. Also on this card, which Dave, Uncle Dave Meltzer, gave it the lowest ever WCW star rating. Gave it a -5.
Ooh.
-5.
Oh, that's pretty good.
And it was voted the worst match of the year in 1998. Also on this card, Red Sting, Wolfpack Sting, fought Bret Hart on there.
Some of the things too, the WCW ring, that's an 18 by 18 ring. WWE rings, WWF rings are 20 by 20. So you've got a little bit of a smaller ring, and that can play into the matchups.
So I was just going to ask you, for people that don't know, there are different sizes of the ring. Does that, as a old performer, are there pros and cons to that? Which one you prefer or not to have?
Obviously, it can limit what you do. WCW used to shoot a TV show called WCW Saturday Night, as well as WCW Worldwide.
Yes, yep.
And the worldwide tapings were done where TNA would tape Universal Studios in Florida, and they used a 16 by 16 ring.
Oh, okay.
And so when you had really big wrestlers that were really large, like the 400-pound guys or the 6'10 guys, it did look a little ridiculous.
Sure, makes sense.
When you're so used to watching maybe that WWF ring, that were equally as large of competitors, but they didn't. The ring was so much bigger. So, like a lot of the TNA guys would tell you back in the 6-sided days, it took some getting used to. There's generally the middle of a wrestling ring is the sweet spot. The bumps are going to hurt the less. In the 6-sided ring, there really isn't a sweet spot with the way the beams and all that stuff cross.
just so we're on the same page here, Goldberg
Yeah.
making that iconic entrance with all of the Las Vegas finest.
Were you a Goldberg guy?
I
or
was
no?
not a Goldberg
Yeah.
guy at all, no, but
I didn't really care for him either, but this entrance, you got to admit, is pretty cool.
I was just gonna say this entrance is where it's at. You know, pounding on the locker room, going behind the scenes, behind the curtain, then being walked out by security or officers, and then when you had the pyro, and then he comes through and spits it out. I mean, it was actually just top notch, phenomenal. And here, Goldberg making his way to the top of the ramp. Mhm. And there you see Goldberg panning away. He's got the belt, and there goes the pyro. Of course, we know Gilbert would later do a parody of that with sparklers, which was pretty funny. But yeah, Goldberg right here. He was at the top of his game, arguably the top wrestler in the world back in 1998.
Yeah, he brought in a lot of new fans. I mean, he just had that real badass gimmick where he just came in and just slaughtered people.
So timeline-wise, is this during the streak? So had Goldberg's undefeated at this point?
Yep, so Goldberg is still undefeated. What that record is, I'm not sure. As people are calling for Goldberg for president. I mean, he's got the t-shirts, he's got the towels. A very marketable guy. I mean, for a guy that, you know, in all essence was Stone Cold Steve Austin, you know, in black trunks, still could make some money off of him.
Kevin Sullivan on a lot of his podcasts would refer to Goldberg as the Golden Goose.
Yeah, true.
And you can see why. Like, obviously he's super over. Definitely popular. And what made this matchup kind of unique was DDP here was the people's champion, so to say.
Yeah.
He was like the top local homegrown babyface. So all these challengers that Goldberg had vanquished going into this matchup were generally bad guys. So this had that big fight feel, you know, kind of Hogan Warrior-esque.
Sure, absolutely.
Because,
and I just remember too, right as that lockup, this is back when they had the 3.5 hour pay-per-view, and the pay-per-view feed for most people
cut off.
Actually cut off and never got to see this. And they showed this match the next night on Nitro.
They did a big rating for that, I remember too.
So yeah, the main event, if you ordered this, the majority of people did not even see this until the very next day. Could you imagine that right before the lockup, DDP and Goldberg, and then you're like, oh, the lights come back,
so
and they just shut her down.
So for those of you that are maybe too young to remember what a pay-per-view was like, so you bought it on your television, you had this block of time, and at the end of that time, it literally started over.
Really? Yeah. So like if it started at 7 to 10, that was your time.
Yep, and at 10 o'clock, it would revert back to whatever aired at 7. So sometimes it was like a little pregame show type warm-up with the announcers or in the city they're in. And I can only imagine the frustration level.
Yeah.
Holy buckets.
Goldberg, with the intensity he always brought to the ring.
And the Goldberg wrestled a lot in that era, showing off some athleticism there. Holy cow. But a lot of his matches were very one-sided, very dominant, very quick.
Yeah, you get the spear, the jackhammer, pose, and you know, get to stepping.
And I do remember some of his pay-per-view matches, you got to see a little more to Goldberg, you know, like you got to see some holds, like right here, for example. You know, you got to see him be a little bit vulnerable.
Right, something you would definitely not see on Thunder or Nitro, where they made him look extra strong. Here, it's like you kind of question, like, wow, Goldberg could actually lose, you know, to fan favorite DDP. You know, and that's a guy right there, DDP, been around the game for a long time. At this point,
he got a late start.
he got a late start, but still made it around to AWA. Had a little cup of coffee in the WWF where he rode rhythm and blues to the ring for WrestleMania in the Cadillac, I believe it was. And of course, Ready to Rumble was in it with David Arquette, becoming a WCW champion and then eventually going to WWE. A nice little career for starting late in the game.
Yeah, he managed the Diamond Stud, who you'd know as Scott Hall, Razor Ramon. They had a good little program over the TV title back in the day. And he just rose up the ranks, was very, very popular. Very much a man of the people, very charismatic.
He had the cool music too. He came out with the knockoff Nirvana music.
Self high five. Yeah. And of course, a lot of people might remember too the WWE when he came through and he had the mask on and he pulled it off. That was another classic moment of debuting.
DDP's finisher was taken from Johnny Ace, the Ace Crusher from Japan.
That was great trivia out there. Some people might know it as something else.
Yeah, so he called it the Diamond Cutter, which was before Randy Orton's RKO.
RKO.
Out of nowhere.
And it was
Johnny Ace, DDP, Randy Orton.
So yeah, his Diamond Cutter is much more like the RKO. Stone Cold Steve Austin did the Stone Cold Stunner, which was a sit-down version of a similar kind of move, get him in that cravat over the shoulder, and that was a little more Ace Crusher-ish. And this was, DDP has said, he was inspired and took the move from
Absolutely. 1998. One thing I want to point out, too, is the canvas. It's got the Snickers logo on there and the big Halloween Havoc. Like, how awesome would that be to have that in your collection? Like, they really popped back in the day. That was really cool.
So something like Vince McMahon has said in interviews, he was always against branding when it came to his rings.
Yep. So I was surprised they never did that. They never went that route.
And it does look a little weird if you watch like old UFC and you'll see like Tap Out or other brands that maybe don't exist anymore.
Right.
Like sprinkled all over the canvas. It is a little weird, but at the time it seems so normal because that's what is on. And nowadays you have the digital signage, so you can flip it for each match. Like I think back recently we had the WrestleMania Ray versus Dom, and they had like Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Right, it was everywhere. Yes.
Then there was that weird
the Mountain Dew one.
Yes, and during the pandemic,
LA Knight and Bray Wyatt, I think it was
that zombie match with Miz and
sure. Yep, I know which one you're talking about.
But Halloween Havoc, that stood the test of time. They still use that today in NXT, and it goes to show like, the brand name, like how it lasted the test of time and how it still is relevant today.
Yeah, DDP, a little flying head scissors action there.
Little kick to the corner, Goldberg going for the spear. Ouch! Ow. Onto the floor he spills.
I don't see, is that a mat or is that concrete on the floor?
I was just going to say that.
That looks like concrete.
No, that's the mat. It's the mat, but very, very close.
Concrete colored mat.
Yeah. Which is, I guess, theater of the mind in some essence. Like you want them to think that it's concrete, that they're falling on that.
Because this is around the era where they started having padded mats on the floor outside the ring. That wasn't a thing.
No, not always.
In the 80s and stuff like that.
Absolutely not.
That was definitely something that came during the Monday Night Wars time
I mean, there was a point when we were wrestling fans, there was no barricades. It was literally just a string, a rope, right? And then there was just the concrete all the way around. DDP laying the boots into Goldberg there. I mean, I'm not going to lie here. Goldberg looks like he could be a little gas blowing up. I mean, it's probably longer than a typical Goldberg match, as you were saying previously. Looks like he's selling the shoulder injury into the turnbuckle there. Both men are down, starting the count.
The Rock used to do a float over DDT, and that was very similar.
True.
Oh, the
bang.
self high five
time into the spear. Knocking the wind out of DDP, man. His head hit the canvas really hard there.
I believe that's referee Mickey J.
Mickey J. Shout out Mickey J, the referee. It's almost like he's grabbing his earpiece there. Is probably somebody screaming like, "We're not on air right now, but keep going." Yeah, DDP had a hard time getting up there. I think he really did knock the wind out of him on that spear.
Yeah, Goldberg was definitely super intense. There was even a spot one time where he was supposed to smash a window backstage, and he did it legit and sliced open his arm.
Oh,
and,
yeah, hit the car. Yeah, I remember that. Yo.
That was a common WCW thing. They broke a lot of limos and cars.
No! Hits him with the diamond cutter.
Out of nowhere.
Nice.
The ref looking surprised, like it should be over, but DDP too far away to make the cover. I think at this point the crowd too is they're standing up, as you can see. They're like, okay, like, is Goldberg the streak's gonna be done?
Is it gonna happen?
Maybe they're looking for somebody to run in here at this point. I don't know. DDP going for the cover. 1, 2. Has got the 2.
Obviously, the Goldberg streak was the most successful streak probably in WCW.
It's not even close, hands down.
And then, I mean, the when I think of the best streak in WWE, it was probably Undertaker's WrestleMania streak.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
Which that was a neat way to do that, you know.
Yeah. Some people might disagree with you, like Tatanka, who had a 2-year streak, and then Jackhammer to finish it off hits the 3.
This is what, 121-0 at the time?
We'll say that. Yeah, absolutely. The big gold belt, one of the best belts of all time,
it's
too,
a very
right?
nice belt.
The man in the green hitting us with the Daniel Bryan yes chants there.
And a lot of signs in the crowd. It's not something that you really see nowadays.
That's another topic for another show, the signs.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the 90s, if you went to a wrestling show, you would like bobbing and weaving looking through to watch the action.
And not a cell phone in sight.
No. I mean, as you said, Merc, the golden goose. I mean, WCW did the right thing. They rode Goldberg out for what he was. Not even just the flavor of the month, the flavor of the years. I mean, he was the guy that they counted on to bring the cheddar home.
Yeah, and I think for as cool as the NWO was, like, you always have to have that foil. Like, they had Sting, and then eventually Goldberg kind of took the reins. But the problem is with the streak is you have to end it at some time. So you got to pick the right guy to do it, you know. And if you don't, you could really upset a lot of fans.
Gonna throw it out there. In hindsight, looking at it now, how would you have ended this streak?
I think you pick a young guy. I mean, Chris Jericho was a guy that feuded with Goldberg, but they never really gave him the ball to run, so that's why he ended up jumping to WWF. I think you got to pick like a young guy to establish himself as a main event talent.
Merc, be the booker. Anything you would have done different or kept it the same?
I think they actually did a lot of things more right at the end than they got credit for. You know, by pushing Booker T as a singles wrestler, Scott Steiner as a singles wrestler, those guys would have been very credible. And like you said, it helped make them. Like when you think about Brock Lesnar beating Undertaker, that really cemented Brock Lesnar as the Beast incarnate. And they could have given that rub in WCW to one of those guys. Nash didn't need that. He was already a made man.
Yeah, you think of that with Undertaker. A lot of people at one point thought Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase Jr. DiBiase Jr. might have been that guy to beat Undertaker to get that rub to lift, and little did we know.
Yeah, I was hoping Orton would beat The Undertaker.
All right, and that puts a wrap up on the show for World Championship Wrestling WCW. For Mike Merc, Dashing Derek, I am Devon, and we will see you next Tuesday, 6:05 Eastern. Check out that Pro Wrestling T-Store, Ultimate Wrestling Trivia. Subscribe, tell a friend, and we will see ya when we see ya.